That day, I mustered the courage to let him know that if he was interested in my sister, he should just come out and say it. I said, "Hey, if you're interested in my sister, we can work something out." I met this person through his family. I was 18 at the time, and he was 23, right? He lived in Belo Horizonte, and I lived in Januaria, which is in the north of Minas Gerais. We didn't have any interest in each other at first. We only exchanged letters, because we didn't have the technology we have today. If we called each other every 3 seconds, and I was in love with him because he treated me very well, respected me, and everything. Things began to change. When I moved to Belo Horizonte at the age of 17, I tried to go to college by taking previous university exams. I had already completed my school leaving certificate, and since my family has always been very traditional and prioritized education, I finally went to Belo Horizonte to work and attend college. At that time, I was searching for a place to live. I had the opportunity to stay with his mother, who was very kind and welcoming. I stayed there for about 30 days, and then I decided it was time for me to move on. I wanted to start my own life. We weren't married yet, and I didn't want to live with his mother anymore. Then I realized that there was already an issue with his mother there. I thought it was strange that she was his wife and he was your husband. I felt very uncomfortable, and she spoke to me in a cruel tone. "You were there for dinner back then, but I don't remember what happened." She gave me the wrong address and bus. I found myself in a very dangerous area, and it was late at night. I didn't know anyone, and then I think her husband, my father-in-law, realized that they had bad intentions towards me and said, "I will pursue her." I found myself in a tight spot, and there I was, sorry as a bus driver. It was the end of the line, and he was there. She ventured out into this area, which resembled a favela, a very peculiar place, quite unappealing, with almost no houses. They found me on a hill, and they took me with them. I was very scared, and she was quite insulted. She was so direct, and I was a bit overwhelmed, because I was used to the country, and not used to buildings or city life. They were always the best, and I found it all very strange, because I come from a normal family. The guy who has access to things was very well brought up, right? I didn't understand why she did it, so I moved to my house, which was very good, because it was also nearby my work. So far, everything has been fine. One day, I was at work, and it was a Saturday. He said he wanted to meet me, and we could go home together. I said, "Sure, that sounds great." I waited for him at the door, and he came completely covered in mud and very tipsy. I realized there was a problem, but he said no. He did drink beer from time to time, which wasn't typical, but he said he couldn't return to his parents' house, because they wouldn't know about his drinking. Usually, he slept at home, and I was happy to host him. Eventually, he came to stay with me, and we spent a while together. I noticed that he drank a lot, but, as I mentioned, I worked really hard to make a living. He had his parents' house, and I had my own place. At the time, I was living in a dorm while I was struggling to get into college. Eventually, I was accepted, and I studied law for a year or so. I chose to live with him, and we were already engaged. I wanted to, and I told him that I didn't want to live without him. I gave up my life for it, and he didn't appreciate it. When I moved to São José dos Campos in the state of São Paulo, he said, "Sinara, why don't you invest 100% in photography?" He thought that photography was a field where you could be happy and do something meaningful, and he encouraged me to pursue it. At the time, I had already stopped studying law, and was attending another university to study advertising. I even graduated, right? I started out studying photography, fashion photography, and graphic design. At that time, I enrolled in an art university, and I was hired by the art scene. We started building our lives together, but everything just got worse, because he started drinking a lot. I couldn't control it. It was a really tough time, and it had a really bad effect on me. He started to change, and I had to dye my hair the same color he chose when I changed my hairstyle. There was a problem with my clothes, and he did some things that I still don't understand why he did. It was the most frustrating part of our relationship. We lived in a very large apartment when we first started dating. I have this habit of taking off my shoes as soon as I come home and leaving them there. I don't wear shoes at home, but I do wear socks. It's just a matter of cleanliness. Then one day, he hid my shoes. I looked everywhere for my shoes, my clothes, and other belongings. I thought the house was haunted, and I was afraid. I prayed with my family at home, and I started to feel much better. There was a time when my mother came to visit me in São José dos Campos, and I said, "Mom, I put my shoes at the entrance to the house. When I get the shoes, he's gone. It's no longer there, isn't it?" He went to work, and I studied in another city. I went to college in another city, so he came from work and I went to college. We were in this rush, just like every young couple. Whenever I came home, he was either very drunk, or had his face in the toilet, and I had to help him, for fear that he could come in like an alcoholic. Our house was full of people, and sometimes I arrived from the university, I'd come home at 11:30 p.m., and find a bunch of friends hanging out. It was a bit overwhelming, to be honest. I didn't have much privacy, and it was hard to enjoy my space. But I wasn't the main target, you know. He kept my clothes and shoes, and made me believe in ghosts in the house. He made me doubt myself. I felt like it wasn't real, and that scared me. Then, it got really bad. I had a friend who was very close to us. We made it through college together, and she lived in a neighboring town. She came to visit us, and I had one guest room at home. I said, "Hey, you sleep here, because tomorrow we'll be going up to college." On the day I went out with him, we wanted to do a few purchases, but we had an argument. He was very aggressive, very strange. He was not your typical, everyday kind of guy. Then, I came home with him, and we had a little dog at the time. Our sweet pup took the garbage bag, and spread the garbage around the living room. I picked up the mess and said, "Wow, I will clean it." We didn't argue anymore. He went to the kitchen, and I don't remember what happened when he and I had something to eat. I went into the living room, and my friend went into the bedroom. Is that right? I was scared, and I held the broom on the floor and looked at him, asking why he did that. He swore he didn't, but it had happened. He wanted me to believe he didn't hit me, that it was all in my head, because I was crazy. Then I started crying too. At this point, my friend was already crying in the room, and I will never forget it. I looked at her, and he said, "Please tell me that he didn't hit me, because he says it's a lie." Then I ran away. When I moved, she looked at me, crying, and said, "He didn't just hit you because I saw his fist hit your back, but because I heard the sound of the blow when he hit you," and I told him. He said he would call the police, because there was no way to save this relationship. He just told me not to do it, saying he would change. You know, he was already in a cycle of counter-violence. He said he wanted to change, but he was struggling. I thought, oh my gosh, what will happen to my family? I was so ashamed to tell my father that I had been beaten. I'll tell him that my marriage ended because my husband beat me. How should I tell my mother? How should I tell my sisters? I couldn't muster the strength to leave, so I accepted the situation. I thought it would be better if things changed, so I started going to church and asking God for help. He drank a lot and stopped coming back, and then he came back late to work, which led to him being fired. He was one of those who went right. At that time, my family helped him find another job, and helped him move again, to a new city. Unfortunately, he started drinking again. Then, he started teaching at a college, but he was let go for some reason. I'm not sure what happened there. After that, he started making comments about how unattractive my body was and how it wasn't working well. He said I needed to lose weight, and I felt really hurt. Then, his mother came at me with words and behavior that made me feel so humiliated. It really took a toll on me. I told him I didn't want to return to his parents' house, but he said either I go or I don't. I'll be alone. I won't stop visiting my parents, I said. He said I don't go without you because you are my wife, you have to be with me. So we argued, and he insisted that I go with him. I felt humiliated by his family. They knew from his father and his sister, but his mother was not younger than him. Some uncles and aunts were very quiet and respectfully hid my clothes. I remember that one time, I had on a hat, and he was at her home. She came to me and said, "Someone came in here and took him. Don't get in touch with him, leave him alone, and then you can buy another one." She took my things with her when I went home. I had to take my suitcase with a padlock, and I still don't know what's inside. I think she was doing what she thought was right, and she wanted to make me doubt myself. She wanted me to think I'm crazy, you know. I don't know what you wanted with it, right? I only know that the situation at some point became very serious, and I said, "I'll tell you, I don't go there because she's not very kind to me. I'm not talking about your wife. She's a wonderful person." I started to leave because people came up to me and said, "Wow, one day you get a child. This child will be so beautiful," they said. "But your mother-in-law didn't want you to get pregnant, so she said no." I was afraid of her, so I didn't say anything. I was here for a long time, and today I'm saying, I needed a lot of courage and therapy to get this interview today. My sweet, I have a sister who was 18 years old when I started going out with him. She was only 7 years old, wasn't she? He has a sister of the same age as me. My sister came on vacation, and he said, "You are very lonely. We live completely isolated from our families." I have traveled more and more. There was a year in which he was 70 days in 365 days spent home. So he was not at home, and he said he would feel more comfortable if he knew that someone was with me. He wanted my sister to live with us. I didn't see any issue with it, and we were in a pretty good financial situation. So, she came to stay with us and he said, "You don't have any kids?" I replied, "I don't have any kids. We'll just have to figure it out." When I was diagnosed with some health issues, I realized that having kids wasn't in the cards for me. I would need to undergo a long treatment, so I told him, "I don't want to become a mom, but everything's fine." And then he said, "We'll be like your sister, right? We'll raise her, and we'll give her everything we need." I thought it was really sweet and romantic. We even set up a room just for them. She was like part of our family, and we'd go to church together. She was really into her religion back then, and he hadn't been drinking. He was really involved in all sorts of church activities. Me, my sister, and me also worked, so I worked when he came on board and when I didn't work from home anymore, because if I had worked, it would have caused problems. I didn't want to have any problems with him at all, because his way of punishing me was to be silent. He'd spend days there, not saying a word, to show me what I did was wrong. It was deafening, and at that point, I was already really weak from feeling so miserable and the way he treated me. He exhibited a few strange behaviors, and he said that the more afraid I became of the things he had done to me, the more aroused he became. I knew that I could scare him more and more, including intimacy. I think intimacy has really done a lot of damage to him, and then I think I disappeared. I lost my powers. I was almost never off, and I got up to the bed, not feeling well. I thought it was very strange, and I said to him, I'm not doing well. I want to make a career, and my wife doesn't work. She lives off what I give, etc. And then he said, he did me always set goals. I had prejudices against many things, so I couldn't work anymore. So I closed my company with great pain in my heart. I had to close it, so I started. At that time, I started taking pictures sometimes, and I had 2 jobs, because he came on board. I continued to photograph for the company, but unfortunately, it ended with the crisis in Brazil. I think that was the last straw. I was dealing with depression at home, and I couldn't work. I was always getting weaker, and I cried a lot. Depression is a terrible illness, and I got it. One evening, when he was at boarding school, I went out for dinner with my sister. I started having panic attacks, and my face would go all red, and I'd start shaking. I went to the restaurant and told my mom, hey, I have to go to the hospital now. So, you have a panic attack. He was so kind, though, giving me the phone number and address of a psychiatrist, and I got an appointment with this doctor. I started to improve in the gym, and then I realized that I had overcome the paranoia that let me believe me that it haunted in our house was something bad, a being that hid my shoes, my clothes, my products, hidden. And hey, me just know that I felt better, and he was annoyed. It seemed like the happier I became, the more he seemed to be bothered. Then he started treating me like I was disabled, like when I went to the supermarket. He said, don't stay home, rest. I don't want you to do anything. And I thought, wow, he really takes care of me. I had never received such care before, and it made me realize that he truly wanted to look after me. He took me to the supermarket and treated me so kindly. I told him, you know, this is the man I've always wanted. I said, people, I'm being treated for depression, and I feel so much better. And then I became myself again. Of course, he said that your sister was going with me, and he took my sister with me. She was much younger than us and always treated her like a daughter. Our family was happy, and I felt better after. A few months later, I started working again. I was working alone when he was traveling, and I noticed that he felt uncomfortable. There were moments of happiness, and then moments of sadness. He became strange, and I didn't understand why. Then I remembered that it was New Year's Eve, and I told him to leave us and travel. Let's do something, and he said, oh, let's go to the beach. A daughter for us. And then hey, I went out with you. I don't know what happened that day. He said he had something to eat, took our house with us, a few drinks, because we stayed in an inn, it was far away from home. We had a daughter, and then he said he had to go to the psychiatrist. I don't know what happened that day. He said he had something to eat, and we went to the car. I ate some of the things he had taken, and I got sick. I lost consciousness, and when I woke up, neither she nor my sister nor he were in the guest house. You weren't there. I don't know where they were. I don't know what happened. I only know that a lot of time has passed. They came back and said you fell asleep, and we went. I said, no, I didn't sleep. I just went to sleep. I was absolutely certain that I had passed out and noticed that something extraordinary had happened, you know. And then everything was very confusing in my head, because I was confronted with the wrong things every time. He said I should go to the psychiatrist. He said I was depressed and needed help. Then one day, my sister came home from work and said no. I asked her to stay a bit longer, but she said she was leaving work at 10 a.m. I said okay. She came home and looked at me, closed the door and left. She started crying, and I said, let's try to understand each other. He said, no, no, go. She had a bad day at work. We went into the room with him, and I called him to talk. I looked at him and said, you are interested in my sister. That's what we do in our house. If you say we have to solve the situation, then he looked at me and said, you're crazy. You see things that aren't there. Are you not there? Are you hallucinating? I'm a man of God. I'm an authority figure in this house, and you're the one speaking up about me. We're going to have to talk about the sacred communion meal, because I go to the men's church meeting. He has the whole picture of a man of God who uses God to go into the church, a man with social concerns, to say I was crazy and I felt like I shit when I followed him. When I came home, my sister still lived with him, she was just there. You know your house, and so moving so, he turned to me and said, I asked you to come back here, because I just wanted to see you. In the face and around one. Ask for divorce. I said, what does that mean? Are you nothing without me? When he said that, I can't even describe what I felt. I called my psychologist at the time, and she said, Sinara, you have to understand that a person like him will say things like that. When you're overweight, we'll encourage you to lose weight, and then he'll get closer. One day, he'll say your hair isn't good, and you'll change. Then, you'll change again, because the problem is with him. At that time, I somehow had my nose, and I couldn't stand it anymore. What's up? Sister moved, and we helped her move to her apartment, and so on. My mother came, and I cried a lot. I was completely devastated. Then I went to my sister's house, where I finally slept with my mother. The next day, he just said, my parents, we come home, and you can no longer come in, and all of my clothes, everything I built, everything I had in our apartment was in a garbage bag, and he put everything in my trash. I could feel it, but I couldn't see it. I remember when I was sleeping in my sister's room, and he said, as soon as your sister leaves, we will talk. We had to talk. I went to our room, which was a suite. I wanted to take a shower after I left the room to get some water, but he stood in my sister's room and looked because her things weren't there. He was very sad, because she was no longer in the house, and then he came up and started screaming that I ran out. I locked myself in the room, called my psychologist, and then went out of the house to run away. I had something like that happen when Sinara was there. He changed his personality, and when he saw that I didn't answer, he said, oh my darling, I'm talking about them, so he has. It managed to change. And that was very confusing for me, because I didn't know what I should do in such a situation. I said, he will beat me, or he will kill me. What's wrong? If it happened, I would have died. He started to become violent and aggressive, screaming. He stopped the car with me in an abandoned street, screaming with the windows closed and saying the worst things he had ever said. I didn't have the courage to say them out loud, so I put on a few clothes, everything I had in the apartment, a suitcase, and if it happened, I would have died there. He became so violent and aggressive, screaming at the top of his lungs. He stopped the car with me in an abandoned street, and screamed with the windows closed, saying the worst things he had ever said. I didn't have the courage to say it out loud, so I gathered my things, everything I had in the apartment, my suitcase, and ran away. I picked up the car key on the edge of the table, and he came behind me. I opened the apartment door and ran out. He never came after me, by chance, out of God's grace. I don't know what he would have done with me that night. My neighbor left her apartment with her husband. I entered the apartment almost breathlessly, and he shouted at me, threw me out of the house, and said I wouldn't go. He started screaming, I have the car key. I leave. Then they tried to help me take me, and talked to me about getting me to bed. I got a car and went to my sister's. I tried to find him to sign the divorce papers, but I met someone else. We became a couple of lovers and so on, and in the end I got pregnant with this person. I had one with this person, but I had the daughter. I was still not ready to get married again to start a family and such. I was alone in Ireland, another country, single mother. During this time, I worked as a translator in hospitals, in a psychiatric ward, and in different areas. I also worked as a photographer and a barista. Then I joined a business and became the head of the company. I took maternity leave when my daughter was born, and that was an important factor in my healing process. My daughter has been a life-saving presence for me. We have been separated since 2017. In the meantime, I worked as a translator in hospitals, in a psychiatric ward, and in different areas. I also worked as a photographer and a barista. Then I joined a business and became the head of the company. I took maternity leave when my daughter was born, and that was an important factor in my healing process. My daughter was my lifeline. We have been separated since 2017. Every time the divorce was signed, when the lawyer went to close the divorce, he went to the law firm and gave a hut in the law firm. Every time, it was hell. I never understood why he didn't want to divorce me. To be honest, everything came to light later, during the pandemic. It took a while for everything to come to light. Then, one day, he called me and said, "Look, I am pregnant." He was so kind and understanding when he told me I was pregnant. But then he changed his mind. He said that when my daughter and I drove to Brazil, I should look both ways before crossing the street. I never forgot that, so I was very scared to travel to Brazil with my daughter. I called him, and my blood pressure went up. I went to the hospital, because he said I was a person nobody liked. I was worried that I would never be a good mother, and that I didn't have the right to be pregnant. He wanted me to take my daughter away no matter what. I told him that I had an abortion, and he didn't think about what would happen to me. Then he said, "When you die, I'll take your body, you'll leave some money in the bank account that your sister has access to. I'll come and pick up your body. I'll bring it to Brazil. I'll take him to your family. Don't worry." He spoke as if I weren't even there. He was a human being to him, but he spoke as if I weren't. He referred to me as if I were nothing. He called me to write a letter in case I'd kill myself, and said everything I had to write in the letter was very clear. My intentions are very clear, and I only know that at the time, I was with my daughter's father, and he was in the midst of this situation. I sent him a message, but then I stopped when my daughter's father intervened. I signed the divorce, and it was the happiest day of my life. My younger sister, who still lived in São José, was very strange. I called her, but she didn't answer. I have videos, but I don't see it from my daughter, so I called her, and she said, "Oh, your ex is at home here." I said, "But why is he at your home?" To him, Sinara, no matter what he did to you, and it was very suspicious, right? I called my mother, and she said, "What's going on?" My mother and daughter work a lot, and I want to visit her, because she's working so hard during the pandemic. Many Brazilians are struggling financially. My middle sister always said, "Nora, something has happened in this story," and I spoke to my mother and said, "You're crazy." I told her, "My dear, she's my daughter, that's all. You're being unkind to her and to me. I've protected them." Then, I called my father one day and said, "Papa, I think either they had an affair that led to my divorce or they're together. I can't take the pressure." And then she recently called an aunt. She said, "Look, there's an affair with the ex-husband of the Sinara and that's it." Then my aunt said, "You have to decide for your family or for your family." I said, "I'll choose him," and then they actually lived together. Everything he did was with their vow. It was with her vow, and she helped him with a few other things. They could have ended very badly for me, but thank God I have. It managed to reverse the situation, right? I will not do that here, because it is very complicated, and they live together. It was a plan that the two of them had discarded from the start, and she has a lot to tell. She had an affair with him while I was sick in bed, trying to relax. That belongs to me. The psychologist said there was something, and the lawyer agreed. My psychologist said that the reason why he didn't want to be divorced by myself was that he had planned the last attack, and then the last attack came, because he didn't want to get divorced by me. He divorced me when I was already pregnant, right, in an advanced stage. Unfortunately, due to the circumstances, I had to relinquish half of my daughter's custody. Her father made it clear that he wouldn't let me leave the country with her, and I couldn't even visit Ireland, where I was less than 10 months into the divorce and had started a new relationship. As hard as it is to imagine, someone can still get pregnant, even if they are in a different country. My ex-husband and I were separated, and he was supposed to get 50% custody of our daughter. But he refused to get a DNA test, even though he knew we were together. He said he didn't need to because he lived in another country. He was granted custody of my daughter, and when we separated, he said he would never show me in Brazil. The most heartbreaking part of this story is that my sister, who works with my ex-husband, was born on the same day as me. She has a very difficult personality, and if I can use this word, she is very pathological. He would have stayed with my sister, who lives in Europe, and I would have understood that we could still be together, but in the end, he had a clone of me, a person who was born on the same day as me, a person who speaks like me, has the same voice, and the same laugh. It's all very pathological, and when everything came to light, I called her, but she didn't answer, so I called him. He replied, and I told him I had said what was going on. I will stay with your sister in 2022. I got to know someone, and we got married last year, right? The fact that I came here today to give this interview is because he gave me this strength. Everything I got through, he supported me 100%, right? He's a different person now. He knows my problem and helps so many women. He said they have to talk to me, because this interview doesn't make me a victim. For me, it means being here as a woman who managed to get out of this situation. I was betrayed and cheated, and I did it to start from the front. I've been able to get back on my feet, and today, I use my voice to help other people. One of the things I've learned is that when you don't know who you are, or what your strength is, you just do what my ex-husband did. If you stop taking care of yourself and your financial independence, you're in trouble. Your studies, your career. So put yourself first, so that you can get up in a situation like mine and move forward, because it is very difficult. It took years. After the therapy, I spent 15 years of my life in this situation without feeling ashamed or humiliated. I could escape inferior, they know, and thank God I can look today and say, I'm not there, this woman, she doesn't exist more. And yesterday, I had a conversation with my husband and said, you know that this interview would take place today, and so on, and today. It's been a year since I established myself again. We moved from Ireland to Finland. Today is a big victory for us. I've established myself here, and I'm very happy to be away from these people. I don't have to go through it, but I'm separated from them. Today is a big day for us. I'm so happy to be here on my own, but I'm also sorry that my husband just arrived and said he would pick up my daughter from school. I'd love for you to come here and show him, so we can both do our own thing. I'd really appreciate it. We're cool, so that's my husband. Together, we have 5 children, 2 teenagers, and 1 child. We have one huge family today.